"You're bad for my brand, Lorraine." That's what my daughter-in-law said, right in front of my son and my granddaughter. She didn't mean my cooking or my words. She meant me, the way I looked, the way I didn't fit her perfect little videos. I just stood there holding the dish I'd baked and watched my son say nothing. That hurt more than her words. This house used to be full of music. My husband built it with his own hands, every corner filled with laughter and piano notes. I thought I was helping. I thought family meant something. But that night, as I closed the piano lid, I realized I still had one song left to play. And that song was going to change everything. My name is Lorraine Whitmore. I'm 62 years old, a retired music teacher, and a widow. I've lived most of my life in a small town where everybody knows your story even when you wish they didn't. I used to spend my days surrounded by noise, students practicing off-key, the sound of lockers slamming, my husband humming in the next room as he built another instrument in his workshop. Now the days are mostly quiet, and I've learned that silence isn't peaceful when it isn't chosen. Henry, my husband, passed away 3 years ago. He was a craftsman, the kind of man who didn't just fix things but built them better than before. He made our piano by hand, sanding the wood until it felt like silk, insisting that every key should sound like a heartbeat. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to play it anymore. I would sit on the old bench with my hands resting on the keys, but nothing came out. It felt wrong to fill the house with music when the person who loved it most wasn't there to hear it. There's a piece of music he never finished, a waltz he started writing for me the year we were supposed to retire. He called it the Wisteria Waltz. He said it would be slow and gentle, the kind of melody that feels like sunlight through curtains. The sheet still sits on the piano, the ink faded, the last pages blank. Sometimes I think he left it that way on purpose, so I'd have something to hold on to, a reason to keep the house alive. The piano sits by the window in what used to be our music room. Outside, the wisteria vines have climbed halfway up the porch rail. They bloom every spring without fail, even though I stopped trimming them years ago. They remind me that life keeps going, whether you're ready or not. That morning, I was drinking tea at the kitchen table when the phone rang. I hadn't heard my son's voice in weeks, maybe months. Caleb has always been kind but busy, the sort of man who believes in taking care of his family by working himself to exhaustion. He sounded tired, polite, and just a little nervous. "Hey, Mom, how are you doing these days?" he asked. I told him I was fine. I always say that, even when it's not true. The truth is that after Henry died, I kept myself busy with the garden and the church choir, but there's only so much comfort you can find in routine. I think Caleb knew that, even if I didn't say it. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Mom, Sabrina and I were talking. Rosie's been asking about you a lot lately. She misses you. We thought maybe you could come stay with us for a while." At first, I didn't know what to say. I'd visited before, of course, but staying there, that was different. He went on quickly as if trying to convince me before I could change my mind. "The house is big. You'd have your own room. It'd be good for Rosie, and Sabrina's been really busy with work lately. We could all help each other out." I could hear the hope in his voice, and I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that maybe this was what I needed, a chance to be part of something again. The house had felt too big since Henry was gone, too quiet at night. So I said yes. I spent the next week packing. Just 2 suitcases, clothes, photo albums, a few of Henry's old tools, and his unfinished music. Before I left, I sat by the piano one last time and laid my hand on the lid. "I'll be back," I said out loud, though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. Maybe to the house, maybe to him. When I arrived at Caleb's home, the first thing I saw was Rosie running toward me, barefoot and smiling so wide it made my heart ache. "Grandma," she shouted, throwing her arms around my legs. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed being needed until that moment. Behind her, Sabrina stood in the doorway, picture perfect as always. Her smile was polite, the kind that doesn't touch the eyes. "Lorraine," she said, "we're so glad you're here." Her tone was kind enough, but there was something in the way she said it. Careful, measured, like she was already setting boundaries. That evening, as I unpacked in the guest room, Rosie came in holding a small purple flower from the garden. "Mom says these are wisterias," she said proudly. "She doesn't like how they grow everywhere, but I think they're pretty. Can we keep them, Grandma?" I smiled and took the flower from her hand. "Of course, sweetheart. They're my favorite, too." She grinned and skipped away, leaving me alone in the quiet room. I placed the wisteria on the nightstand beside Henry's photo and thought, for the first time in a long while, that maybe things were finally turning around. But as I looked out the window that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the invitation had been too easy, too perfect, like a song that starts on the wrong note but you don't notice until it's too late. I didn't know it then, but moving into that house wasn't the beginning of comfort. It was the beginning of something else entirely, something that would test every bit of quiet strength I had left. It didn't take long for me to notice that my son's house didn't feel much like a home. Everything looked too perfect, too arranged. The living room was spotless, the furniture all in neutral colors, and the light coming through the windows seemed carefully managed, not too harsh, not too soft. On my first morning there, Sabrina was already moving things around, checking angles, adjusting curtains. At first, I thought she was just particular about keeping things tidy, but when she set a camera on a tripod in the corner of the kitchen, I realized I'd stepped into something else entirely. "Okay, everyone," she called out, her voice bright and practiced. "Today's vlog is a special one. Meet Grandma Elle." She said it like it was a surprise party, her tone high and excited. I stood there, half smiling, unsure what to do with my hands. Rosie ran to my side and hugged me, proud to be part of whatever this was. Caleb gave me a small, encouraging smile, the kind that said, "Just go along with it, Mom." So I did. Sabrina placed a microphone on my collar and told me to act natural, which in hindsight was the first warning sign that nothing about this was going to be natural. She started the camera, then looked straight into the lens. "Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Holt Family Channel. Today we have a very special guest, Caleb's mom, Lorraine, or as Rosie calls her, Grandma Elle." She turned to me, smiling wide. "Say hi, Grandma." I waved awkwardly. "Hello there," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The camera light blinked red. It was small, but it felt like a spotlight. Sabrina laughed, too loud and too bright. "Isn't she adorable?" I'm sure she meant it as a compliment, but it made me feel like I was a prop, something to be shown, not heard. We filmed for almost an hour. She asked me questions about my favorite family traditions and what it's like living with us now, even though I'd only arrived the night before. Each time I tried to answer honestly, she'd interrupt with, "That's great, but can you say it with more energy?" Or, "Try smiling when you talk. It'll look better on camera." When she was done, she turned off the light and sighed with satisfaction. "Perfect," she said. "This one's going to do really well." I didn't understand what that meant at first. That evening, she showed me the video on her laptop. The intro had music, captions, and a cheerful voiceover. She'd cut out most of what I'd said, keeping only the parts where I was smiling or nodding. The rest of the time, she was talking, explaining, demonstrating, showing how to maintain harmony across generations. I watched myself on screen and barely recognized the woman there. My words weren't really mine anymore. They'd been edited into something neat and harmless like a decoration on a shelf. Rosie loved it, though. She giggled every time her face appeared, waving at the screen and shouting, "That's me, Grandma." I smiled at her because she didn't know any better. For her, it was just fun, her family on TV. But later that night, after everyone went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window and looked out at the yard, where the wisteria vines were glowing faintly in the porch light. I thought about how Henry used to say, "The truth always sounds better live." He never liked recordings. He said they flattened emotion, made everything too clean. Now I understood what he meant. The next morning, the comments started rolling in. Sabrina read them aloud while making coffee. "People love you, Lorraine. Look, she's such a sweet grandma. And your mother-in-law is so wholesome." She grinned, scrolling faster. "See, I told you this would be great." I nodded and tried to smile, though my stomach turned. They didn't love me. They loved the version she'd created, the smiling, quiet woman who fit perfectly into her brand of picture-perfect family life. From that day on, every meal, every walk, every conversation seemed to come with a camera nearby. Sometimes it was obvious sitting on the counter. Other times I'd catch the red light blinking from a shelf or a tripod hidden behind a plant. She called it capturing real life, but it felt more like living in a play I hadn't agreed to join. Rosie was the only one who didn't care about the cameras. She'd tug on my sleeve and ask me to play piano with her, or to tell her stories about when her dad was little. Those were the only moments that felt real, when we were just us, not content for strangers to watch. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that she was young and ambitious, and this was just her way of expressing herself. But deep down, I felt something shift. Something small and invisible, like a crack forming in glass. I didn't know it yet, but from the moment she uploaded that first video, I had stopped being a person in that house. I had become part of the background, useful, smiling, silent. A character with feelings but no lines. It started with small comments and the kind that sound polite if you're not really listening. One morning, as we were setting up for another one of Sabrina's family breakfasts, she looked at me and said with a cheerful tone, "Mom, could you maybe wear something a little brighter today? The camera hates gray." She laughed after she said it, as if it were nothing, but something in her voice made me freeze for a second. I looked down at my sweater, soft and simple, the kind of thing Henry used to say made me look calm. "Oh," I said quietly, "I didn't realize." "It's fine," she said quickly, already turning to fix her hair in the camera screen. "We just want the videos to look fresh and happy, you know?" Happy. That word was starting to sound less like a feeling and more like an order. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. "Mom, don't worry about dinner. You should rest." Or, "You don't have to help with the dishes. We've got it." At first, I thought it was kindness, but there was always something in her tone, a thin layer of meaning under the words, like she was slowly moving me out of the picture. Caleb didn't notice. He was always busy. Long hours, late nights, phone calls about projects that sounded important. Whenever I tried to tell him how strange it felt to live in a house where every moment might be filmed, he'd nod distractedly and say, "Sabrina's just creative, Mom. That's her job." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think this was just a new kind of life I didn't understand. Then, one night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with my tea and opened the family channel on YouTube. I hadn't looked at it since the Meet Grandma Elle video. There were 5 new uploads. I clicked on one titled, "When Tradition Gets in the Way." At first, I thought maybe it was about something else, but there I was, sitting at the table talking about family meals. Only this time, my words were cut up and rearranged. Sabrina's voice narrated over mine, explaining how some people have trouble letting go of outdated ways of thinking. Then she laughed lightly and said, "But we're teaching Grandma to try new things." I watched the comments roll past the screen, people calling me sweet but stubborn, set in her ways, lucky her kids are patient. My chest tightened. I didn't remember saying half the things she'd used. I replayed the video again, listening carefully. My voice was calm, but she had trimmed the pauses, changed the order, and added captions that twisted the meaning. I looked old, small, and a little foolish. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark window. It wasn't anger yet. It was something quieter, heavier, shame mixed with confusion. I told myself she didn't mean it. Maybe she was just trying to make the video interesting. Maybe she didn't realize how it sounded. But then, later that night, I saw a notification on her phone as she walked past me in the hallway. New subscribers plush 200, and I understood that she knew exactly what she was doing. 2 nights later, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs, opened her laptop on the counter, and stared at the page with my face smiling out from the thumbnail. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was self-respect. But I clicked remove video. It was gone in an instant. For the first time in weeks, the house felt still, as if I'd taken back something that belonged to me. The next morning, Sabrina came down the stairs fast, her phone in her hand, eyes wide. "Did you delete my video?" I froze. "Your video?" "Our video, Mom. The one with you at the table?" Her voice was sharp now, no sweetness left. "Do you have any idea how long it took to edit that? How much work goes into what I do?" "I just thought," I began, but she cut me off. "You thought what? That you could just erase it because you didn't like how you looked? That's not how this works. You can't just delete my content." Her content. That word hit me like a slap. Caleb came in halfway through the argument, still in his work clothes. "What's going on?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Your mom deleted my video," Sabrina said, her tone shaking with anger. "Hours of work, gone." He looked at me, then at her, clearly exhausted. "Mom, maybe next time you should talk to her before—" I didn't let him finish. "Next time?" I said softly. "You think there's going to be a next time?" The room went quiet. Sabrina's face was red. Caleb sighed and said, "Can we please not do this right now?" Then he walked out, like he always did when things got tense. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, and I didn't even know if it was from guilt or anger. That night, lying awake in the dark, I realized something I wish I hadn't. In this house, truth didn't matter anymore. Only the version that made people watch did. And in this new world, this strange, shining, digital world, whoever held the camera decided who mattered. It was a Sunday morning when I realized I had disappeared. Not literally, of course. I was still there, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, while Rosie built towers out of sugar packets. But when Sabrina posted the new family album on her website, my face was nowhere to be found. I scrolled through the pictures twice just to make sure I hadn't missed one. There was Caleb smiling beside Rosie in their matching blue outfits. There was Sabrina laughing with her hand on his arm, the morning light catching her hair perfectly. There was even the dog, wearing a tiny bow, but not me. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I was behind the camera, or maybe I'd walked out of frame. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't been invited to the photo shoot at all. That afternoon, while she was editing the pictures on her laptop, I asked about it as gently as I could. "I saw the new photos you posted," I said. "They're lovely. I just wondered, were there any with me?" Sabrina didn't even look up. "Oh, Mom, you know how it is. The theme this time was cozy modern living. The market doesn't really go for the older vibe." "The older vibe," I repeated quietly, unsure if I was supposed to laugh or cry. She smiled, still typing. "Don't take it personally, okay? It's just branding. People want to see something aspirational." Aspirational? That was a new word for you don't fit? Caleb walked into the room just then, pulling off his tie. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing between us. "Everything's fine," Sabrina said quickly. "Just explaining how the blog works." I smiled at him and nodded, even though my throat was tight. He kissed her on the forehead, said something about a deadline, and went upstairs without waiting for an answer. Rosie came in a few minutes later, holding one of the photos Sabrina had printed. She studied it closely, her little brows furrowed. "Grandma," she said, "why aren't you in this picture? Mommy said it's our family photo." I froze for a second, trying to think of something that wouldn't make her sad. "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly, "sometimes grown-ups take turns being in pictures." She looked confused, "But it's not fair if you never get a turn." I smiled and touched her hair. "You're right, it's not." She seemed satisfied with that and ran off to play, but I couldn't stop staring at that photograph in her hand. The perfect little family smiling in front of the wisteria vines. I was the one who had planted those vines. I was the one who watered them every week. And now they were just part of the backdrop, like I had been. Later that evening, I stood by the window while they were setting up another shoot outside. The light was golden, that soft glow that makes everything look warmer than it really is. Sabrina adjusted the tripod, told Caleb where to stand, fixed Rosie's hair, and stepped back to check the frame. Through the glass, I could hear her laugh, that bright, practiced sound she used for the camera. Caleb smiled on cue. Rosie waved at me from the yard, her little hand moving excitedly back and forth. I waved back, but she didn't see it. Sabrina was already calling her name, asking her to look at the camera. The moment was gone. I stayed there for a long time after the shutter clicked. From where I stood, I could see their smiles but not hear their voices. The window reflected my own face, half in shadow, half in light. I looked like a stranger watching someone else's life. That night, I heard them laughing in the living room as Sabrina went through the photos. I didn't go in. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened one of my old albums. Real photos, printed on paper, the kind you can hold in your hands. There was Henry, young and alive, his arm around me after a school concert. Caleb as a boy, messy-haired, holding a paper trumpet he'd made in my class. The pictures were blurry, the colors faded, but they were honest. No filters, no captions, just moments. I ran my fingers over the old photo paper and thought about how strange it was that in this house full of technology, the only things that felt real were the things time had already touched. Somewhere downstairs I heard Sabrina say, "Perfect shot, everyone looks so natural." I almost laughed. Sometimes cruelty doesn't come in shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, through the things people choose to leave out. And that silence, that careful erasing, can be louder than any word. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that looks peaceful until you realize how much tension hides underneath the smiles. Sabrina had planned another live stream for her channel, Family Breakfast with Grandma. I didn't know it was going to be live until she was already counting down from 3. There were lights set up around the kitchen, the camera perched on a little tripod pointed at the table, and a vase of fresh flowers that didn't belong there, but she said they made the frame look warmer. Caleb was at the stove flipping pancakes, Rosie was giggling beside him, and I was trying to pour juice without getting in the way. Sabrina started her bright, practiced voice. "Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Holt Family Channel. We're doing breakfast together today. Real family time." She reached for the camera, smiling like everything in the world was perfect. And here's Grandma Elle helping out, as always. She makes the best orange juice from scratch. I smiled and said something polite, I don't even remember what, and lifted the jug. Maybe my hands shook a little, or maybe I just wasn't paying enough attention. The next thing I knew, the glass slipped from my hand, hit the edge of the table, and the juice spilled everywhere, over the pancakes, over the tablecloth, and worst of all, across the open laptop Sabrina had left beside her coffee cup. There was a pop, a spark, and then everything went black. The lights, the screen, the sound, all of it. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Caleb froze, holding the spatula in midair. Rosie looked between us, her mouth open in surprise, and then Sabrina's voice cut through the silence. "Oh my God, no!" She rushed forward, grabbed the laptop, shook it, and then turned to me, her face white with shock and anger. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "It was an accident." She was breathing hard, staring at the laptop like she could will it back to life. "That's not just a computer, Lorraine. That's my work, my sponsor contract, my schedule, my—" She stopped, clutching her head. $10,000. That stream was worth $10,000. Caleb stepped in then, his voice calm but tired. "Sabrina, take a breath. We'll figure it out." "Figure it out?" she snapped. "She just ruined it." He turned to me, looking helpless. "Mom, maybe go sit down. I'll clean this up." "I can help," I said quietly, but he shook his head. Sabrina was pacing now, muttering to herself, grabbing paper towels, dabbing at the counter like it would fix anything. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "Every time, every single time." Rosie tugged at my hand, eyes wide. "It's okay, Grandma. Mommy gets mad a lot." I smiled at her, even though my chest felt heavy. "It's all right, sweetheart." I went upstairs after that. I told myself, she was just upset. Anyone would be. Money, work, pressure. It makes people say things they don't mean. But even hours later, I could still hear her voice in my head, sharp and cold. $10,000. That night, I stayed awake for a long time. Around midnight, I went to the kitchen for water. The lights were off except for the one over the sink. Sabrina was standing there, her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see me. "I can't do this anymore," she said quietly into the phone. "She's impossible. Every time I try to make something work, she ruins it. She acts helpless, but she knows what she's doing. She's sabotaging me." Her voice trembled, but not from sadness. It was anger mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. Or pride. "I swear," she said, "if she stays here much longer, I'm going to lose everything." I stood there for a moment, frozen, then turned and went back upstairs before she saw me. I didn't cry. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands, the same hands that had taught Caleb to hold a pencil, that had braided Rosie's hair that morning, that had, in one clumsy second, become the enemy. When Caleb came in later to say goodnight, I pretended to be asleep. He kissed my forehead like he always did when he was a boy, and for a moment I almost believed everything was fine. But when I heard their voices through the wall, low, tense, full of words they didn't want me to hear, I knew something had changed. For the first time since I'd moved in, I didn't feel like a guest trying to fit in. I felt like a burden they were all too polite to carry. After that night, the air in the house felt different, heavier, like even the walls knew I'd crossed some invisible line. I tried to stay out of everyone's way. I made breakfast early before Sabrina came downstairs. I spent the afternoons walking with Rosie in the yard, pretending everything was fine. But each time I passed the living room, where the piano sat untouched, something in me ached. It was Henry's piano, the one thing in the house that still felt like mine. One afternoon, when Sabrina and Caleb were out and Rosie was taking a nap, I went to the piano room. The sunlight was soft that day, falling through the wisteria vines and painting the floor with patches of violet. Dust floated in the air, catching the light like tiny ghosts. I opened the lid, pressed one key, and listened to the sound fade. It was flat, almost dull. I smiled sadly. Henry would have complained about that. He was always so particular about tuning. I sat there for a while, just staring at the wood, tracing the small scratches along the edge. That's when I noticed the box, a small wooden case tucked under the bench. I hadn't opened it in years. It was Henry's. He used to keep his tools in it, small files, tuning forks, pencils, things that always smelled faintly of cedar and metal. My hands shook a little as I lifted the lid. Inside, instead of tools, there were papers. Old sheet music, folded letters, and one envelope with my name written on it in Henry's handwriting. It took me a moment to breathe. I hadn't seen his handwriting since the day I packed up his things. It looked just the same. Neat, careful, slightly leaning to the right. I sat down, opened the envelope, and unfolded the letter. It started simply. If you're reading this, it means the music in this house has gone quiet. Lorraine, this home was never just mine. It belongs to every note you ever played, every song you ever taught, every laugh that echoed in these rooms. When I built this piano, I built it for you. Not because you needed it, but because you reminded me why sound matters. One day, someone will try to tell you that you take up too much space, that you're in the way. Promise me you'll remember this. Silence doesn't mean you're finished. It only means you're waiting for the right moment to begin again. There will always be another song, Lorraine, but you decide when to play it, with all my love. Henry. I don't know how long I sat there after that. The words blurred as I read them again and again, the paper soft beneath my fingers. I could almost hear his voice, low and patient, like he was sitting beside me. For the first time in a long while, I let myself cry. Not the quiet kind where you try to hold it in. The deep kind, the one that comes from somewhere too far down to stop. When it was over, I felt lighter, even though nothing around me had changed. The house was still quiet, Sabrina was still angry, Caleb was still distant. But inside, something small had started to move again, something I thought I'd buried with Henry. I put the letter back in the envelope and slid it under the piano lid, next to the unfinished sheet of Wisteria Waltz. The first few lines of notes were still there, faint but clear. I touched them gently and smiled. He'd written the melody in G major, bright, hopeful, like morning light. I could almost imagine how it would have sounded if he'd finished it. I didn't play it that day, I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I closed the lid and rested my hand on the wood. I hear you, I whispered. Rosie came into the room a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes. Grandma, are you okay? I nodded and smiled at her. Yes, sweetheart. I was just listening to Grandpa's music. She climbed onto the bench beside me. Can you play it? Not yet, I said softly. But I will, when the time is right. She seemed satisfied with that answer. She laid her head against my shoulder, and together we sat in the fading light, not speaking, just listening to the creak of the floor and the faint hum of the world outside. Maybe Henry was right. Maybe silence isn't an ending at all. It's just a rest in the song, a pause before the melody returns. A week after I found Henry's letter, the house seemed quieter than usual. Sabrina wasn't speaking to me much, and Caleb spent most of his evenings buried in work. Rosie was the only one who still filled the rooms with sound, humming made-up songs as she drew pictures on the kitchen floor. I thought maybe things were settling down, that the storm had passed. But I was wrong. On a Tuesday morning, while making tea, I heard Sabrina laughing in her office. It wasn't her normal laugh, the one she used when she was trying to sound perfect for her followers. This one was real, sharp, cruel, satisfied. I didn't know what she was laughing at until later that day, when my phone buzzed with a notification from YouTube. Holt Family Channel uploaded, When Mother-in-Law Thinks She's the Star. The title alone made my stomach twist. I almost didn't click it. But curiosity, or maybe fear, made me open it anyway. The video started with cheerful background music, Sabrina's voice soft and amused. Sometimes, she said, when family moves in, you learn that old habits die hard, especially when Grandma wants to take center stage. Then came the footage. Me, sitting at the piano, talking to Rosie about music. But the clips were cut in strange places, rearranged. My voice sounded impatient, even arrogant, because she'd spliced my sentences together, removing my pauses, changing the order. She'd even zoomed in on my face when I frowned, as if to make me look angry. The comments started almost immediately. Poor Sabrina, she's so patient. That old lady clearly loves attention. She should get a life instead of living off her kids. I read them one by one, each word hitting a little deeper, I'd never been called an old lady before, not like that. Not as an insult, not as a joke for strangers to laugh at. I closed the app, then opened it again. I couldn't stop looking. It was like watching a slow car crash I couldn't turn away from. By afternoon, the video had thousands of views. Sabrina was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she scrolled through her phone. When she saw me walk in, she smiled. That same plastic smile she used for her audience. "Oh, Mom," she said, you've gone viral." She said it like it was a compliment. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. "Why would you post that?" I finally asked. She shrugged. "It's just content, Lorraine. People love a little family tension. It's relatable." "Relatable?" I repeated quietly. "Don't take it so seriously," she said. "They don't mean the comments. It's all entertainment." Then she turned back to her phone, already finished with the conversation. I went outside, needing air. The sun was bright, almost too bright. Across the street, my neighbor Beau Finch was trimming his hedges. He looked up when he saw me, gave a small wave, then frowned. "Hey, Lorraine," he called, and was, "You okay? You've been quiet lately." I hesitated, then crossed the yard. Beau had lived next door since before Caleb was born. He was retired now, used to be a police officer, but you'd never guess it from the way he tended his garden, gentle as a pastor. He leaned on the fence as I told him what had happened, not every detail, just enough. About the video, the comments, the laughter. He listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. "I've seen that kind of thing before," he said. "People believe what they're shown. They don't look for what's missing." I looked down at my hands. It's strange, isn't it? Being turned into something you're not and realizing there's nothing you can do about it. Beau smiled sadly. "They only see what she wants them to see. But people like that? They always overplay their hand. You just have to wait." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what he meant. Waiting sounded like doing nothing, and I'd already done too much of that. That night, I sat in bed with my phone again. I scrolled through the video, watched myself move and speak in ways that didn't feel like me. I noticed the small edits, how she'd cut out every time I laughed, every time I touched Rosie's hair or smiled at Caleb. She'd kept only the moments that made me look hard, proud, impossible to please. It was brilliant in a way, cruel, but brilliant. She turned real life into a story, and I was the villain. I thought about deleting the app, but then I remembered Henry's letter. Silence doesn't mean you're finished. It only means you're waiting for the right moment to begin again. Maybe this was what he meant. Maybe the time to play hadn't come yet. I turned off my phone and lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, the pipes clicking, the wisteria brushing against the window. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. I realized then that I didn't need to shout or defend myself. Words can't change people who are entertained by cruelty. I didn't need to fight her on her terms. I just needed to wait for the right frame, the one where the truth would finally fit. After the video, I stopped speaking much. Not out of fear. I'd simply realized that every word I said could be twisted into something else. So I saved my breath. Silence, I decided, could be more powerful than noise if you knew how to use it. But silence doesn't mean inaction. While Sabrina busied herself with her new family makeover series, I started to learn. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with Rosie's old tablet, watching tutorials on how to use cameras, how to store files, how to back things up where no one could touch them. I learned fast. Maybe teaching all those years had trained me to pay attention, to notice what others missed. Soon I was recording every filming session, quietly, discreetly. A small camera of my own, hidden on the shelf or in the folds of a curtain. I kept the originals labeled and dated, stored on an old external drive Henry had once used for his music projects. Every file was a truth, uncut, unpolished, unedited. And truth, I'd learned, was the most dangerous kind of evidence. A few weeks later, I got a call from Marcus Lane, one of my former students. He used to be the shy boy in the back row who always carried sheet music in his backpack. Now he was a lawyer. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "I was in town for a case and wondered if I could stop by." He arrived that afternoon carrying a briefcase and the same kind eyes he'd had at 16. I made tea and we sat in the small sunroom, where the light fell just right through the wisteria vines. After some polite talk about his work and my garden, his tone shifted. "Forgive me for asking," he said, "but do you still have your husband's estate documents? The ones from the year he passed?" I blinked. "Yes. I have the will and a notarized copy somewhere in my file box. Why? He hesitated. When I was helping a client with an old deed last week, I came across a familiar name, Henry Whitmore. It mentioned something called a life estate on this property. I frowned. Life estate? Marcus smiled gently. It means that legally you have the right to live here and to manage or lease this property for the rest of your life. No one can remove you, not even your heirs, unless you choose to leave. It's a protection clause Henry must have included. I felt my breath catch. I'd never heard of that. When Henry died, I trusted the lawyer to handle everything. I'd only signed what they told me to. I'd never opened the notarized copy. It hurt too much to see his name in legal ink instead of handwriting. Would you like me to check it? Marcus asked. I nodded. My hands trembled as I fetched the old file from the cabinet, the same folder I hadn't touched in years. Marcus carefully unfolded the pages, scanning them line by line. There, he said finally, tapping a paragraph near the end. Clause 7B, the property known as Whitmore House, shall remain under the life estate of Lorraine Whitmore, granting her full residence and management rights for the duration of her lifetime. He looked up at me. That means this is still your house, Lorraine. Always has been. I stared at him, the words sinking in slowly, like sunlight through fog. You mean, Sabrina she can't make you leave, he finished gently, and she certainly can't claim ownership for her channel or any related business without your written consent. For a long moment I couldn't speak. I just sat there, my fingers pressed to the paper, feeling Henry's quiet presence between the lines. He'd known. He'd thought ahead, like he always did. Marcus closed the folder and said softly, Don't use this yet. Keep it safe. There's a time for every truth, and sometimes silence makes the right note ring louder when it finally plays. I nodded. You sound like your old teacher. He laughed. Maybe I learned something after all. When he left, the house felt different. Not warmer exactly, but steadier, like the foundation had settled again. I carried the file to the piano room and opened Henry's wooden box. Inside lay his unfinished sheet of Wisteria Waltz, the melody still waiting for its next note. I placed the legal document beside it, folded neatly, and closed the lid. Then I sat down at the piano and pressed a single key. It rang softly, pure and low, the sound of something beginning again. I didn't need to tell anyone what I'd found. Not yet. Some music, I realized, isn't meant to be played until the right moment. And when that moment comes, you don't need to shout. You just let the truth play itself. Rosie's 8th birthday arrived on a Saturday, bright and windy, the kind of spring day that made the wisteria bloom faster than usual. The whole house smelled like sugar and flowers and tension. Sabrina had been planning the party for weeks. She called it the rebranding moment, though she said it like a joke. We're going to remind people who we are, she told Caleb one night, her voice full of determination. A happy family. No drama, no pity, just love and laughter. I stayed quiet in the corner, folding napkins and pretending not to hear. By morning, the kitchen looked like a studio again. Lights, tripods, reflectors. Even the cake table had its own soft glow lamp. Sabrina had arranged everything down to the last detail. Pastel balloons, coordinated outfits, and a bright pink banner that read Rosie's Magical Day. She moved through the room like a director, headset in her ear, phone in her hand, barking gentle instructions that didn't sound gentle at all. Caleb, move that table 6 inches to the left. Rosie, sweetheart, stay near the window for the best light. When she noticed me frosting the cake, she gave me a quick smile. Polite, practiced. Mom, you don't have to do that. We already have catering coming. I know, I said, smoothing the icing, but this one's for Rosie. It's chocolate, her favorite. She hesitated for a moment, then said, All right, but keep it simple. We don't want it to look too homemade. Homemade. I almost smiled. To me, that word had always meant love. By noon, guests started to arrive, mostly other parents from Rosie's school, dressed like they were going to a magazine shoot instead of a birthday party. Sabrina greeted each one with the same bright enthusiasm, handing out cupcakes and making sure everyone saw the camera crew she'd hired for the live stream. I stayed near the kitchen, helping when I could, setting plates, carrying juice, fixing decorations. I didn't mind being in the background. I'd gotten used to it. Every once in a while, Rosie would run over and tug my sleeve. Grandma, look, she'd whisper, showing me her new tiara, or the tiny microphone she'd found in her toy box. She loved singing. She'd been begging to perform a song for her friends all week. When the live stream started, Sabrina gathered everyone around the big white cake. "Okay, everyone," she said cheerfully to the camera. "We are live. Welcome to Rosie's magical day. Thank you for celebrating with us." She looked perfect, glowing, smiling, her voice steady, the image of the perfect mother, the perfect family. Rosie stood beside her, holding the little toy microphone. "Can Grandma sing with me?" she asked suddenly, her small voice carrying over the chatter. The room went quiet. A few parents looked around awkwardly. Sabrina's smile froze. "What?" Rosie repeated louder this time. "I want Grandma to sing with me. She knows my song." I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, Sabrina's tone turned sharp. "No, sweetie, not now. You don't understand. Everything has to fit the concept." Rosie frowned. "But it's my birthday." I said no. Sabrina snapped, her voice louder than she meant. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The cameraman hesitated, unsure whether to keep filming. Caleb stepped forward. "Honey, maybe—" Sabrina cut him off. "No, Caleb. We talked about this. Everything needs to go smoothly. We're not improvising on camera." Rosie's lip trembled. She looked from her mother to me, holding out the little microphone. "Grandma," she whispered, "oh, whoa, please." I froze. For a moment I saw Henry in her, that same quiet persistence, the refusal to let someone else decide what mattered. Sabrina's voice came again, quieter this time, but colder. "Mom, please don't encourage her. We've worked too hard on this." I looked at her, then at Rosie, her eyes wide and hopeful. I smiled gently and shook my head. "It's okay, sweetheart. You sing. I'll listen." Rosie nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the toy mic. The camera light blinked red. The music started. She sang alone. Her small, clear voice filled the room, trembling at first, then steady, pure. And for the first time that day, everything went still. No chatter, no instructions, no performance. Just her. I stood at the edge of the frame, just out of view, watching her sing the song we used to practice together. When she finished, everyone clapped. Sabrina laughed too loudly, hugging Rosie for the camera. "Wasn't she amazing?" she said, her voice already turning back to its broadcast tone. But Rosie looked past her, toward me, and smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that no one else noticed. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the house had gone silent again, I sat at the piano in the dark. The leftover balloons drifted against the ceiling. The smell of frosting still hung in the air. On the piano, Rosie had left her toy microphone. Bright pink, a single sticker peeling off the side. I picked it up and turned it in my hands. Now I understood what Henry meant, that some music shouldn't be played until the moment demands it. I didn't need to speak tonight. When the time came, I would let the music speak for me. The night of the live stream was supposed to be Sabrina's triumph. She called it A Night with the Holts, Family, Legacy, and Love. It wasn't just another video. This one had sponsors, media attention, and even a small production team. The living room had been turned into a set. Bright lights, microphones clipped to shirts, cables snaking across the floor. I could barely recognize the house anymore. Before the camera started rolling, Sabrina looked at herself in the mirror, adjusting her earrings. "Tonight changes everything," she said to Caleb, who just nodded, already exhausted. I stayed near the back of the room, watching quietly. My role was to sit, smile, and stay silent unless asked a question. I didn't mind. I'd already decided that my words would come from somewhere else tonight. When the red light on the camera blinked on, Sabrina transformed instantly, smiling, glowing, her voice soft but precise. "Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our special family stream. It's been a wonderful journey, and tonight we're celebrating what family means to us." The chat on the screen filled with hearts and emojis. Everything looked perfect, until it wasn't. Halfway through the broadcast, while talking about modern family values, Sabrina laughed and turned toward me. "Of course," she said lightly, "some people don't understand that their time has passed. The world moves on." There was laughter, polite, uneasy, from a few guests off camera. Caleb's face tightened, but he said nothing. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet click, like a key turning in a lock. I stood up slowly. For a second, no one moved. Then I stepped out of the frame. The chat exploded instantly. Messages scrolled so fast they blurred. What happened? Where's the grandma going? Is this part of the show? Sabrina's smile faltered. Mom? She said, her voice tight. Where are you going? I didn't answer. I walked down the hall to the music room. The old piano sat waiting, the wisteria light casting soft purple shadows across the keys. I picked up Henry's wooden box, the one holding the unfinished wisteria waltz and his letter, and carried it back to the living room. When I returned, the cameras were still rolling. Sabrina looked panicked. Mom, please, she said through her teeth. You're interrupting the stream. I know, I said calmly. I set the wooden box on the table beside the bright laptop that had replaced our family photo months ago. From my pocket, I took the small USB drive Marcus had given me, the one holding the video he helped me prepare. Without a word, I plugged it in. The screen flickered, and before Sabrina could stop me, the live stream changed. Henry's voice filled the room, warm, steady, unmistakable. The Whitmore house is not a stage for vanity or fame. It is a home, a place where music and truth are meant to be kept, not sold. The room went silent. On the live chat, messages froze. Then, one by one, they started appearing again. Who is that? Is this real? That's her husband's voice. Sabrina's face went pale. Turn it off, she hissed. Mom, turn it off right now. But Caleb stood between us. His expression had changed, for the first time clear, firm. Let it play, he said quietly. Henry's voice continued. If one day the music fades from this house, remember, silence is not the end. It's only waiting for the right note to return. The video faded into the image of Henry and me, sitting at this very piano years ago. He was laughing, his hands covered in sawdust. Then the frame shifted to a scanned document, the notarized deed Marcus had verified. A second later, another voice came in, Marcus's, live, calm, and sure. This property, he said, addressing the camera, is legally under the life estate of Mrs. Lorraine Whitmore. She holds permanent residence and management rights. Any commercial use without her consent violates federal estate law. Sabrina looked like she'd been struck. What are you doing? She whispered. William, you can't. But Marcus just turned toward her. It's all public record, Mrs. Holt. The chat exploded again. She owns the house. The daughter-in-law lied. Justice for Grandma. Rosie ran to me then, wrapping her arms around my waist. Grandma, that was Grandpa's voice, she said softly. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered, holding her close. He was helping us one more time. Sabrina stood frozen, her face drained of color. Caleb didn't say a word. He just reached over and turned off the lights, ending the stream. The camera went dark, but the silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Later that night, when the house was finally still, I sat at the piano again. I pressed one key, the same low G Henry always started with, and let it ring through the room. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain myself. Henry had spoken for me, with his words, with his music, and with the truth that outlasted every lie. The live stream ended in chaos. Within an hour, comments flooded every corner of the internet. The same people who once called me the controlling old lady now flooded Sabrina's channel with outrage. Sponsors pulled their ads. Her follower count dropped by the minute. By morning, Justice for Lorraine was trending. I didn't read much of it. I'd spent enough time staring at screens that told only half the story. I sat in the garden instead, watching the wisteria sway gently in the morning breeze. The house was quiet, not the cold silence from before, but something softer. Honest. Inside, Sabrina had locked herself in the bedroom. Caleb paced the hallway for hours before finally knocking on the door. I heard his voice, low and strained. Sabrina, we need to talk. There was no answer at first. Then the sound of the door opening. I didn't mean to listen, but their voices carried down the hall, raw, unguarded. All these years, Caleb said, his voice breaking, you've treated my mother like a shadow in her own house. And I let you. I thought it was easier to stay quiet than to argue. But last night, watching that video, I realized you've never really seen her, not as a person. There was a pause, then Sabrina's voice. Small, shaking. I didn't hate her, Caleb. She stopped, choking on the words. I was scared. You know what happens to women like me online. If you're not perfect, you disappear. My mother, she faded away when she got older. People stopped listening to her, even when she tried to speak. I thought if I could control everything, the image, the story, maybe that wouldn't happen to me. Her voice broke completely. I didn't want to be forgotten. For a moment, all I heard was silence. Then Caleb said quietly, "And in trying not to be forgotten, you turned my mother into a ghost." I closed my eyes. The words hurt, but they were true. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Sabrina stood in the doorway to the garden, her eyes red and swollen. She looked smaller somehow, as if all the brightness had drained out of her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for everything. For the lies, the videos, the way I treated you. I don't expect forgiveness." I studied her for a long moment. The wind moved through the wisteria, scattering purple petals between us. "I believe you're sorry," I said softly, "but sorrow doesn't undo what's been done." She nodded, tears streaking her face. "I know." Then I added quietly but firmly, "You didn't just hurt me, Sabrina. You hurt yourself by trying to fight a fear that wasn't mine to carry. And somewhere along the way, you made me into the stand-in for that fear." She looked at me confused, then nodded slowly as if understanding. "I did," she said. "I really did." We stood there for a while, not speaking. The house behind us was still, the air heavy with the scent of wisteria and the faint echo of Henry's piano drifting from somewhere deep inside. Caleb joined us a few minutes later, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't know how to fix all of this, but I'll try." I smiled faintly. "You start by listening," I said. "The rest will come." The sun began to rise higher, washing the garden in gold. Rosie's laughter carried faintly from upstairs. A small sound, but bright enough to fill the space between us. I looked at Sabrina, at Caleb, at the house that had survived everything, and I realized something Henry had always known. Justice doesn't need to shout. It arrives quietly, like a reflection in a mirror, showing you not who you were, but who you've become. Sabrina left the house 2 days later. No fight, no shouting, no long explanations. She packed her things quietly in the morning, kissed Rosie on the forehead, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she walked out the door, closing it softly behind her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was relief, like the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Caleb didn't say much that day. He helped her carry the last box to the car, then stood on the porch for a long time after she drove away. When he finally came inside, he looked at me, his eyes tired but clear. "She needs time," he said. I nodded. "So do we." Life began to move slowly again, the way it used to. Caleb started working from home, spending his evenings cooking dinner and helping Rosie with her homework. He smiled more now, not the automatic smile he wore for the camera, but the kind that comes from somewhere real. Rosie filled the house with sound again. She sang while brushing her teeth, hummed when she drew, and begged me every afternoon to teach her something new on the piano. She never asked about the live streams or the followers or the noise outside. For her, the world had shrunk back to the size of this house, and that was enough. One evening, after Rosie had gone to bed and the lights in the living room were low, I walked to the piano. The air smelled faintly of wisteria, even though the windows were closed. I opened the old wooden box one more time. Inside, the letter was still there, folded neatly beside the unfinished score of Wisteria Waltz. Only it wasn't unfinished anymore. In the past weeks, I had been filling in the missing notes, slowly, carefully, just as Henry used to. Every measure had become a memory, every chord a piece of what we'd lost and somehow found again. I placed the sheet on the music stand. The house was utterly still. No cameras, no lights, no red recording dots. Just me, the piano, and the quiet rhythm of a home breathing again. I took a deep breath and began to play. The melody started softly, almost unsure, like the way grief sounds when it tries to turn into forgiveness. Then it grew. Warmer, steadier, filling every corner of the room. Each note carried the weight of everything that had happened. The pain, the silence, the truth finally spoken aloud. Halfway through, I could almost feel Henry there, standing behind me the way he used to, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. When the final chord faded, I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch out, wide and clean. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt. I looked down at the keys and smiled. "Henry," I whispered, "I played the right notes." Then I closed the lid gently, the sound soft as a sigh. Outside, the wind moved through the wisteria vines, brushing against the window like applause, too quiet for the world to hear. And in that silence, the honest kind, the one that comes after the truth, I realized something simple. When truth finally speaks, even silence becomes its own kind of music. Spring came back quietly that year, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath and decided to begin again. The wisteria vines had grown thick and wild, spilling purple blossoms across the porch of Whitmore House. When the wind passed through them, it sounded almost like applause, soft, steady, alive. 6 months had passed since that night. The cameras were gone, the lights were gone. The house had found its rhythm again. Rosie and I started teaching music lessons in the front parlor every Tuesday and Thursday. The students came from the local school, kids who couldn't afford lessons but carried the kind of hunger in their eyes that reminded me of my younger self. Rosie helped me with the younger ones, showing them how to hold their hands properly on the keys. Her patience made me proud in ways I couldn't explain. Sometimes, when the children played their first clear note, I would glance at the old piano and imagine Henry smiling somewhere, pleased that the house had found its voice again. Marcus visited one afternoon in April. He leaned against the doorway, watching one of the boys finish his piece, and when the last note faded, he said softly, "Well, Lorraine, looks like this house finally has its music back." I smiled. "It never really left, Marcus. It was just waiting for the right moment to start playing again." He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "That's what Henry would have said." Then, after a pause, he added, "You turned this place into something more than a home, you know. You turned it into a heartbeat." That evening, Caleb called me to the backyard. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint hung in the air. He'd been working quietly for weeks, sketching plans, ordering wood, refusing to tell me what for. Now I saw it, a small room attached to the house, walls still white and new. Above the door, a simple carved sign read, "The Wisteria Room." "For your lessons," he said shyly. "And for Rosie. I thought it was time this place had a room just for music. And for you." I ran my hand over the carved letters, tracing the shape of each one. "It's perfect," I said. He smiled, a little embarrassed, then added, "Dad would have loved it." I looked at him, my son, older now, gentler, finally unafraid to meet my eyes. And I knew he was right. Inside, Rosie was teaching one of her students how to play the opening bars of Wisteria Waltz. Her small voice carried through the doorway. Softly, like the flowers outside. Grandpa said music grows better that way. I stood there listening, my heart full in a way that words couldn't reach. The evening light drifted across the porch, turning the wisteria petals to gold. For a long time, none of us spoke. There was no need to. The house itself seemed to be breathing again, not for an audience, not for a show, but simply because it could. Justice, I realized, had never been about proving who was right. It was about giving truth enough space to breathe until even silence started to sound like forgiveness. And that, I thought, was the real music Henry had wanted all along. When I closed the piano lid that night, I whispered quietly, almost to myself, "Henry, we did it." The song plays on, not to fight, but to heal. Outside, the wisteria swayed gently in the wind, scattering petals across the porch, and in the quiet that followed, every sound, every breath, every heartbeat felt like part of the same melody, because when truth finally finds its home, the music never really ends. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, the handwriting neat but hesitant, the kind of writing that belongs to someone who has rewritten too many things before deciding to send them. I knew it was from Sabrina before I even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully in thirds. No printed fonts, no logo, no brand watermark. Just ink, slightly smudged where the pen must have paused too long. "Lorraine, I'm not asking to come back. I know that door has to stay closed for a while, maybe forever. I just wanted to say that this is the first thing I've written without a filter, without editing, without worrying about how it looks. I don't want views or followers to read this. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I used to think control was the same as safety, that if I could make the world see what I wanted them to see, I'd never be forgotten. But in trying so hard not to disappear, I erased you instead. I see that now, and it hurts more than I can explain. Thank you for reminding me that truth doesn't need to be performed. It just needs to be lived. Sabrina." I read the letter twice, then a third time. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, but this time not from anger or pain, just the weight of everything behind those words. She hadn't tried to justify herself. There were no excuses, no promises, only honesty. Maybe that was all she ever needed to learn. I smiled faintly and carried the letter to the piano room. The afternoon light came through the window, brushing over the keys and the wisteria shadows on the floor. I opened the wooden box, the one that had held Henry's unfinished music, the letter, and now the proof that truth still finds its way home, and placed Sabrina's letter beside the sheet of wisteria waltz. The melody, complete at last, waited silently on the stand. For a long moment I didn't play. I just sat there, listening to the soft sounds of the house, the ticking clock, the distant hum of Caleb's voice, reading with Rosie, the faint creak of the porch boards as the wind moved through the vines. Then I lifted my hands and let them fall onto the keys. The notes came easily now, no trembling, no hesitation. Each chord felt steady, certain, familiar. The song that once held my grief now carried something different. Forgiveness. As the melody swelled and faded, I thought about all the ways music and truth were the same. Both invisible, both powerful, both capable of filling a room long after the person who made them was gone. When the last note settled into the air, I looked toward the doorway. Rosie stood there barefoot, smiling. "Grandma," she whispered, "you're playing Grandpa's song." "Yes," I said softly, "and it finally sounds the way it was meant to." She giggled, the sound light as wind chimes, and climbed onto the bench beside me. Together we pressed a few keys, at random, her small hands overlapping mine. The piano answered with imperfect, beautiful sound. I looked down at her, then at the music, then at the empty envelope resting beside the letter. Everything that needed to be said had already been written, already been played. In that moment I understood what Henry had meant all along, that justice was never about winning. It was about being able to return to an old song without your hands shaking. The camera lights were gone. The noise was gone. Only the truth remained, steady, unfiltered, alive. As the screen of memory faded to black, the sound of the piano lingered. Soft, clear, whole. And over it, Rosie's laughter, bright and untamed, carried the melody forward.